Welcome to the Kochia Management Webinar. My name is Shannon Chant, and I'm the Crops Extension Specialist with Saskatchewan Agriculture in Swift Current, and I will be chairing today's event. CEUs are being offered for CCAs on this webinar. To get credit, you do need to attend the entire live event, and there will be a QR code at the end of the presentation to collect credit. If you missed the code and have attended live, please email us afterwards and we can work with you to get your credit. So before we start with the formal presentation, I have a few items to share. Our Crops Extension Specialists put on this webinar series each year. We work out of 10 different offices across the province, as you can see here on our map. Each office contains a wide variety of specialists who can help with any agriculture-based questions. If you have ever heard anyone say Saskatchewan is 98% completed the harvest this week, then you have likely heard of the crop report. Our colleagues at Moose Jaw write the crop report each week during the growing season based on data collected from crop reporters across the province. We're always looking for new crop reporters, so please use the QR code to sign up today. I also wanted to mention that the 2024 Crop Diagnostic School will be in person this year and will be held on July 24th and 25th in Melfort. More details are coming soon on that event, along with other upcoming field days hosted by local agri-arm research sites. Lastly, we want to ensure everyone knows the funding available through the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. You can reach out to your local agriculture program specialist to find out what funding you may qualify for. This is a variety of programs. You can scan this QR code to visit and get some more information, and Alanna will be talking about a bit more of this information later on this morning. Along with this information, we have additional resources for everyone under the Handouts tab in the chat box area of the toolbar. This PowerPoint, a document listing available resources to be aware of, and information on upcoming events and opportunities are all located there. They will be shared along with the recording after the webinar is complete. Each of today's presentations will be followed with a live Q&A, and the main hub for today will be your webinar screen. And as mentioned, we'll share relevant downloadable handouts with you in the chat box. The entire session will be recorded, so if you miss anything or wish to revisit any of the presentations, you'll be able to. Recording links will be sent out later today in a follow-up email. An evaluation will pop up at the end of the webinar this morning. Please ensure that you fill out this evaluation. We do use these to figure out what topics you want to learn more about and help prioritize research needs for the future. So we do really value this information, so please fill that out. We do have a few housekeeping notes to keep in mind during the webinar. If anyone has questions during any of the presentations, you can type them in the question box in the bottom right-hand side of your control panel. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but we may need to limit them due to time. Your question will remain anonymous and will only be sent to me. During the presentation, you will be muted so that we can ensure there is no feedback that will interfere with the speaker's audio. So we'll start the day off with Dr. Shaun Sharpe. Dr. Sharpe is a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at the Saskatoon Research and Development Centre in Saskatoon. Dr. Sharpe received his BSc from Mount Allison University in Sackville, Nebraska, his MSc from Dalhousie in Nova Scotia, and his doctorate from the University of Florida in Gainesville. Dr. Sharpe joined the Saskatoon Research and Development Centre in Saskatoon in 2019. He works primarily on high-priority herbicide-resistant weeds and annual agronomic systems, such as Kochia and wild oat. Dr. Sharpe's research involves herbicide-resistant prevention and mitigation, integrated pest management, and developing alternative control techniques. Dr. Sharpe has authored or co-authored over 45 peer-reviewed research or extension articles and currently serves as the Governance Director for the Canadian Weed Science Society. So we'll start whenever you're ready, Shaun.
Good morning, and thank you for the introduction, Shannon. I'm still coming through okay? Okay, thank you for confirming. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you all today about a topic that I am very passionate about and that takes up a lot of my time, and that is Kochia. So today I'm just going to give you an overview of a few studies that we are conducting here, as well as an overview of the current resistance status of kochia. We're going to talk about the 2019 post-harvest survey results, as well as the pre-harvest survey results from 2019-2021, and those are from a colleague, Charles Geddes. I'm going to talk about some spray staging work that I've done using carfentrazone ethyl, which is AIM, a PPO inhibitor group 14 herbicide on kochia, as well as some field studies that we've done looking at intercropping of camelina and peas and integrating that with the herbicide ethyl fluoride. It's a group 3 herbicide. And then I'll be talking about some work that we're doing using physical control strategies such as mulching and mowing to manage kochia on farm. And then lastly, thanks to my colleague, Dr. Brianne Tideman, I'm going to present some information on harvest weed seed control, as well as an experiment that she has conducted using a seed destructor. So to start off, I just want to give everyone a quick overview of where are we at with kochia, which herbicides are out, and which herbicides are a concern. So here we have, this is a table I got from Charles Geddes that he developed from Ian Heap's website, where we log all of the cases of herbicide resistance. And then in this first column, we have the site of action. So we have PS2 inhibitors, ALS inhibitors, auxin mimics, EPSP synthase inhibitors, and PPO inhibitors. The next column, we have the groups that you're going to find on all of the labels. So group 5, 2, 4, 9, and 14. We have the first confirmation in the States, since we share a large land border, as well as the first confirmation in Canada. Now, you will note for Canada, for the first one, we don't have a case identified for PS2 inhibitors or group 5, such as atrazine, and that's largely because we don't use a lot of those herbicides in our system, so they don't get the priority as a lot of these others have. So it's not that we don't have it, it's mostly that we haven't been screening for it. So if we were to find it, I wouldn't be overly surprised, but just a caveat with that, we do know it exists in the States, but we don't really screen for it here because of what herbicides we use. The ALS inhibitors, this is quite widespread now, and an older detection from the late 80s, both in the States and in Canada, in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. The auxin mimics, we have confirmation in 2015 in Saskatchewan for this. The EPSP inhibitors, like glyphosate, 2011 in Alberta, and then very recently, and this is one I want to make sure everybody is aware of, we do have a case of PPO inhibitor resistance in Saskatchewan. Charles Geddes confirmed this in 2021, and I'm going to show a slide about this in a little bit. So we will come back to that. So first, I want to start with the 2019 post-harvest survey. So in this, we go out across the province after harvest, since with kochia, although it's early emerging, it's late to produce seeds. So we collect the seeds then, bringing them back to the greenhouse. We put them in these flats that you see here, and then we spray them and evaluate 3 weeks after. We spray them with glyphosate or dicamba at the standard field rates. And this is a paper that you can find online now that we published earlier this year. If you want some more information about this, the title is right there. So in this first column is the category. So this is how many plants were able to survive after 3 weeks of application, either 0, which would indicate that the population is susceptible, 1 to 20%, which indicates a low level, 21 to 60%, a moderate level, and then 61 to 100% is a high level of resistance. This next 2 columns is for glyphosate, and these next 2 columns are for dicamba. With glyphosate, about 87% of the populations now have some degree of resistance, and this is spread out. So we do have a lot of cases where we're getting to moderate and high levels, whereas with dicamba, a lot of this is still very low level resistance, meaning we're not getting a lot of plants that are able to survive after 3 weeks. But we do have cases where they are. So here is the map first for glyphosate resistance. So the darker the circle, the higher the resistance cases, and you can kind of see here, it's dark blue, purpley, all the way across the province. So it's not that this is occurring in any given area or in any particular area. We are seeing it spread rapidly through the prairie and in Saskatchewan as well. With dicamba, again, we do have a lot of cases and they are scattered quite throughout the province, and there is a couple hot spots here. This was from 4 years ago now, so with the next round of surveys coming up, I would highly anticipate we're going to see more of this become darker blue. So I mentioned group 14 earlier. Charles took all of the survey samples that we had collected previously across the 3 prairie provinces after he had that detection, and then he screened them with heat or cephalothensol at the standard field rate. And out of the 882 samples that he had across the 3 prairie provinces, he did not detect any resistance there, so that is good news. It's not widespread, but it's very, very early in its detection. But we should keep that in mind when we're planning out our herbicide strategies, that there is now a chink in the armor for what we were using to combat the other cases of resistance, such as the group 9, the group 4. So we want to be very mindful of our kochia populations now, and to check them after herbicide application to make sure that they are dying. So this is from the 2019-21 pre-harvest survey, and we don't normally see kochia on this to a high degree, but I wanted to include it because, you know, this all of the kochia samples were resistant to ALS inhibitors. This is the group 2. This is not new news at all. This is what we anticipated would happen, but we had a high number of samples that were collected pre-harvest, and this is the unusual part, because with kochia it does mature later, so it gives us an indication that the kochia in our area is starting to mature earlier. It's going to drop seeds earlier, which means it's going to be easier to contaminate crops at this stage. So that's just another thing to be mindful of. All right, so next I'm going to get into some experiments that we've conducted. This first one I did with Tiana. She was an undergraduate student who wanted to work on kochia for her undergraduate project, and then we repeated this in the greenhouse a couple times to get some more data. So we ended up doing 3 runs of this, and either we sprayed the kochia with carfentrazone ethyl or not, and then we would spray it at different growth stages. And I was interested in this because with kochia, it's able to inhabit a lot of different areas. So it may be emerging and growing at different times. So staging it might be challenging. And I also looked on herbicide labels, and there's times that they'll use heights, and there's times that they'll use leaf number. So I was just kind of curious how these things correlated. So before we sprayed them at different growth stages, we measured the height, we measured how many leaves and how many branches. And then afterwards, we managed damage at 1, 2, and 4 weeks. We also measured leaves, although we only did that for one run because the plants got very big, especially when we weren't spraying them. We measured branches and the presence of reproductive organs. This is primarily flowers, and this is after 4 weeks. So we'll see in a second that I'm a bit concerned about that. So on this graph, on the y-axis, we have kochia height after 4 weeks. That's post-spray. So we sprayed them and then we measured them 4 weeks after. And then on the x-axis, we have the height that we sprayed them at, right? So we have height versus height, and one is 4 weeks into the future. The top line here is the untreated kochia, and the bottom line is the treated kochia. The black dots are the untreated kochia, and the white dots are the treated kochia. Up to 5 centimeters, we were able to control and kill kochia. And as you can see here, it's at 0 height after 4 weeks, but after that stage, we weren't able to get complete control, which is concerning. Whereas, and you can see here that we got a steady increase. So even at staging above 5 centimeters, we do get some stunting, but it is still able to grow. And I'm only going to show heights because they were best able to describe what is happening. So for branch number, we were seeing a few branches when we started to spray, but even the treated kochia was able to start to branch, which means it's going to be able to tumble when it's moving in the environment, right? And so concerning again. And then this is biomass after 4 weeks, and there is quite a bit of stunting, but they are still able to produce biomass. And I'm not going to show it because it's a little yes or no, but the majority of the kochia that was able to live after we sprayed it, it was flowering after 4 weeks, which means we're already getting pollen escape, right? So that's immediate concern. So we have to be very careful when we're staging kochia. Carfentrazone ethyl is a contact type herbicide, so it's only going to have activity where it's making contact. So if there's a lot of kochia that's grouped together, you have to get good coverage there, and the staging is very, very important. And once it gets too big, and I think it has to do with the branches as well, because once the kochia had branched, it was harder to kill, and I think that's because of it had a lot of leaves that were clumped together, and we weren't able to get good coverage. I believe that's what's happening. All right, so next I'm going to talk about some field studies that we did at our farm here, looking at pea and camelina intercrops. And so we were using CDC Amarillo as the pea. For those not familiar with camelina, it's an alternative oil seed. So it was actually originally identified as a weed in flax. It was also called false flax, and it's from the Camelliaceae tribe. So it's quite tolerant to pests, which can take out canola, like blackleg and flea beetles, and it has good competition with weeds. So this experiment, we were interested in a couple different things. We wanted to look at ethofluralin, or EDGE. It's a product by Gowan. We put it out at 0.85 kg of AI per hectare. That's the full label rate for the brown soil zone where our farm is located. The second factor was the planting date, so we were going out mid-May or in mid-June. And then the third system was our cropping system, so we either planted pea by itself, camelina by itself, or an intercrop. In here, we were doing 80 plants per square meter of the pea. The camelina, we were seeding at 550 seeds per square meter, and then the intercrop, we did both. And we just did alternating rows with 2 passes of the seeder, staggered. We're using an RTEC. So this is just a quick overview of what the intercrop looked like. It was very dominated by the camelina. So here on the left is the peas, and then over here is the camelina. You can see some peas at the front where they were kind of escaping and they had a bit of room, they were able to grow, and then you can see them popping out of the top of the camelina. But as far as which crop was able to close canopy quicker, it was definitely camelina, which is pretty obvious from this image here. So the first year we did the study in 2022, we didn't have a lot of kochia. So when we were seeding, I threw some kochia out to try to get a better idea of how these treatments were affecting kochia, which means we grew some very large kochia plants. So we had a 3-way interaction on how it affected density of kochia. So this first column is the seeding date, either mid-May or mid-June, the presence of the herbicide, no, yes, no, yes, and then the cropping system. So when we had peas without the herbicide, we did get kochia, not a ton of it, but 2 plants per square meter, still gonna make a big Christmas tree. And then when we didn't have the herbicide at the later seeding date, we also got kochia, but with the camelina, we had good control with and without the herbicide, it was able to close canopy. And then with the intercrop, we did have some escape at the late seeding date, but with the early seeding date, we didn't. So this is good evidence that we are able to get a crop canopy using camelina and peas to stop kochia after it emerges in the absence of a herbicide. So there is a strong crop competition dynamic there that can be integrated to take some pressure off of our herbicides. This next experiment is one that we conducted on farm on established kochia patches. We worked with growers in the area and they told us where they had bad patches, and we went in and applied these treatments. We put the treatments down in year 1, and then we monitored them for 3 years. So the 6 treatments were either non-treated, where we just let the plants grow, a mowing treatment where we just use a line trimmer or a string trimmer, and we would mow it down every 3 weeks to 4 weeks if the plants had reached a certain height. We tried to seed a competitive perennial grass, AC Saltlander, but unfortunately in these patches and with the environmental conditions, we weren't able to get that grass to establish. So I'm not going to really talk about that further. We put down some black plastic mulch, which worked very well. We put down some hydro mulch, a coconut-based one. The idea here was that a lot of the kochia is on the margins, and there's already an industry that can apply hydro mulch for soil erosion control, so that we could easily come in and spray down these patches if it works well. And then a chaff treatment where we just took straw and chaff from the field and we dumped it on the kochia. So we measured the depth of the mulch with the chaff and the cocoa mulch over time, and then we also counted kochia plants over time. So this first graph is going to show you how deep the mulches were. So we have depth in millimeters on the y-axis. The x-axis is over 2 years, and these are dates that we went out to measure. So 2021 through 2022, we did do this for a third year, but I didn't have the data right in front of me. The dark bars are the coconut mulch or the hydro mulch, and the light bars are the chaff treatment. This is primarily wheat straw and chaff, although we had one site where there was some tillage and we used slough materials such as cattails, and we had one where we didn't have a lot of, I think it was peas the year before, so we actually used kochia to bury itself, and it all worked quite well. So it's very stable, it's very stable in year one, and then we do get some variability due to moisture largely, and precipitation, where we see this kind of spongy up and down happening in year two. Whereas with the hydro mulch, the coconut based mulch, it was fairly stable, but not super thick. And kind of put that out at the recommended rates for hydroseeding and erosion control. So this is kochia density. This is year one. The axis goes up to 1,000 plants per square meter, which is quite a few. So the first treatment here is untreated. We have the coconut mulch, the chaff treatment, and then we have the mowing treatment. This is high in here right now because this was our first timing, and with my students, it measured then mowed. So you can see here with this mowing treatment, it does decline over time, so it does go down to 0. Untreated stays fairly high here. The coconut mulch is working fairly well, but we are getting some escapes through it, and then with the chaff treatment, we did drive those numbers down close to 0. So the chaff treatment worked very well. I don't have the black plastic mulch on here, apologies, but it worked so well that I got 100% control each time, which is great against kochia, but it doesn't do well in stats, so it's not presented here, but it did get 100% control. Year two, so in year one in 2021, we had a drought. In 2022, we also had very dry conditions. So we had an explosion of kochia density in year two. So now we're going up to 10,000 plants per square meter. My poor students helped me count this out. And we can kind of see here that we had so much kochia that it actually thinned itself out. So we kind of see this bell-shaped curve here in the untreated, where we had the population decline on its own. But we are applying herbicides early in the season, so there may be some implications to management there. So this is just 2022 kind of pulled apart so that you can actually see things. So the untreated, again, we're getting very high, 10,000 plants per square meter. That's a very dense kochia patches. Those plants are only getting, 6 inches tall. The coconut mulch was still working, but not quite as effectively now against these higher densities, and the chaff treatment again was working quite well, but we were getting emergence through it at this point in year two. And then with the mowing treatment, those plants were quite stunted, and we did mow repeatedly, but there still was some germination and emergence, so we were still counting plants even at the later timing. So overall, the black plastic mulch worked very well. It did last about 2 years out in the field, and then by year 3, we had to repair it because it was breaking in the sun. This was just a standard black plastic mulch that we got from a big box store. Chaff treatment, I would say, is probably the most promising, since this is something that a lot of growers already have in their field, and it may not have a lot of ecological value to them, whereas now we can move it and then help bury kochia, and it does work very well. The coconut mulch worked okay, but there were cases where it wasn't, and then with mowing, ignore this minimum since it was just accounting, but it did work very well. The caveat here is we end up going out 3-4 times during the season to have to keep that mowed down when we're getting heavy densities. All right. So next I'm going to switch into the harvest weed seed control portion of this. Again, I got a lot of this information from my colleague, Dr. Brianne Tideman. She has been working on this since her PhD. So she is the expert, and I've been brought in to work in this area, and it's an area that I am also interested in. So just to back up, weeds are a very major pest, and we largely control them through herbicide applications, which is where a lot of our problems are now coming to, since the weeds are able to escape the herbicides through resistance evolution. And we're targeting them, hopefully my cursor is showing up, but I'll use the laser pointer too, just to make sure. We largely control them at this stage, right? And then the ones that we miss out here, like oats and thistles, they reproduce, and then we have the seeds going back into the soil, and then we start the cycle all again, and we try to kill them when they're emerging. So the issue here is that our herbicides are starting to break, and we're going to need some non-herbicidal options to manage weeds, because if we keep losing herbicides at this rate, we're going to run out, because we're not making new modes of action faster than we are having them break. And this goes up to 2020, but it has also continued on at this rate. So then harvest weed seed control is a new paradigm, and it was largely developed in Australia because they were a little ahead of us as far as escape from herbicides. And what the goal here is we want to prevent the weeds from going back into the soil seed bank. So we're targeting kind of this step here instead of this one. So we're kind of targeting here as it's going back into the soil. So we don't want the adults that are surviving to reproduce, right? And if they do, we want to kill those seeds before they have a chance to get back to the soil. But for it to be effective, there are some considerations. And I know these images are a little tough to see here, but we need the weed seeds to be retained at the time of crop harvest. So if they're on the ground, they're going to stay on the ground effectively, right? And they need to be at a height that they're going to be collected by the combine. And this is what Brianne has kind of showing here. This is from Australia, so I don't quite know what these weeds are, but they're very tall. And she said the issue was when they were coming through with their combines, these larger weeds here and here, they would tumble off the top of the combine and they just wouldn't go in. So even though you could have the mill on the back, for example, if the weed's not getting into the combine, then it's not going to get to the mill, in which case you're not going to have any control. So they need to stay on the plant and be in an area that's going to go into the combine, and they have to stay on the plant, but they also have to be at a right height that they can move into the combine. And then this is more of a Canadian example. Hopefully you can see that. So this is cleavers. This is in a swath. So it's stayed on the plants so that this material is going to be able to be transferred into the combine and then ultimately into the mill. So harvest weed seed control is not just impact mills. There's actually a bunch of ways that it can be done. Narrow windrow burning is where you're going to put down your swath and then you're going to burn it. Behind you, you can do a direct baling system where you're taking that straw and you're going to bale it, which then can be moved out of your field in that capacity. Chaff lining, where you're going to have your chaff coming out the back in narrow rows, so that your weed seed's not going to be distributed throughout the field. It's going to be in a narrow area in the field, which is going to help. There's the chaff cart, so that you can just take all that chaff and move it off the field. And what I was saying earlier about kochia, this is probably where I would see it having the best fit. It's going to be with a chaff cart, and then you can take that material and dump it on your kochia patches. Chaff tram lining is very close to chaff lining, only it's going to be deposited in areas where your combines are traveling, etc., through the field, so that it's going to be getting driven over and over and over again. And then lastly, we're going to focus more today is going to be with the impact mill. So this is a mill that's going to be installed. Well, this is a external unit, but a lot of the mills now are able to be installed into the back of the combine as one continuous piece. Here we got some close-ups of the physical impact mills. So this is some work from Australia, where they have had more opportunity to have a longer term evaluation of this, right? So this goes from 2002 to 2016, and they were basically evaluating with and without harvest weed seed control, and they're looking at annual ryegrass is their target here in this study. And you can see here both populations were driving down over time, but with the use of harvest weed seed control, those populations were driven close to zero, whereas when it wasn't, those populations would kind of spike and go up and down. So it is quite effective long term. So adoption in Canada, we're at the very start of the adoption curve here. There is adoption, and it is increasing. Last estimate was about 20 to 30 mills. There's quite a few here in the province, actually, as well as a few in Ontario, which means I get pulled into a lot of the work that's being done here. But why aren't more producers adopting it? And this is a slide from Michael Walsh at Australia. So these prices may not be quite accurate. This was a couple of years ago, but essentially it has a high cost associated with it. And there are a number of producers now, but it does have a high startup cost for install and use. So price is a big barrier for adoption. We don't have a lot of data on the efficacy of Canadian weeds, but this is where there is work being done by Brianne and I, largely Brianne. And our need is not the same as the Australians because we still have herbicide options, right? Like we still have herbicides that are working, so we don't have that same drive, which I suspect that's going to be changing over time. So now we're going to have a look at a study that was conducted by Brianne Tideman. Two of them actually. So this first one is just to give you an idea of the importance of the seed staying on the plant. So this is the average seed retention up to 100% of the seed that it's producing. And by end of season, we have 3 species here: canola in the top with the blue, cleavers here with the red, and the blackish line is wild oat, which is one of the targets for the system. And you can see here with the canola, it's bred not to shatter. So as expected, we would be seeing a lot of this seed retain on the plant. The cleavers, which is a good target for the most part, it does start to shatter and lose the seed later in the season, especially getting into the fall. This is in Alberta at Brianne Station. And then with wild oat, you can see here that even before or early on into August, we start to see shatter. So this is going to make it more challenging to manage wild oat with these systems since it is shattering more early, comparable to our spring cereals like wheat and barley. So it is cropping system dependent. There is an environmental factor. A lot of that's going to be rainfall, of course. Rain's going to drive how fast those plants develop and want to reproduce, and of course there's going to be species dependent. So this next study, they were looking at a seed destructor, and so they want to look at weed species. So we got kochia in here, as well as green foxtail, cleavers, canola, and wild oat. So we have a variety of seed sizes. And then they're putting in a lot of seeds through these mills, as well as a lot of chaff volume, and then 3 different types of chaff. So barley, canola, peas, just to get an idea of the 3 different types of chaff that could be going through pulses, oil seeds, and spring cereals. So just some pictures from Brienne to kind of show here's where they were collecting the chaff that they'll be using. Here's the buckets. You can kind of see on this bottom left, this person's kind of over here. So they're going to dump the chaff with the weed seed in it. It's going to go through the mill. This is at Redicop, I believe. And then it goes through the mill and then gets ground kind of down here, which you can see here where they're collecting that material. Here we have the 3 different types of chaff that they evaluated: the barley, the pea, and the canola. And you can kind of see what it turns it into, almost like a flour. Oops, sorry, I cut part of that off. So here's just a couple pictures of the inside of that mill to kind of see those cutter blades, as well as what some of that chaff looked like. All right, so these are her main findings. So we have control on the y-axis of the first graph on your left, and the control starts at 95%. So this is very promising, right? So we're starting at 95% and going up to 100. And then we have our 5 species: kochia, green foxtail, false cleavers, canola, and wild oat. And she's got the seed sizes here, so you can see they're kind of in increasing order of their 1,000 seed weight. And then with kochia in particular, which is very interesting to me, is they're getting very, very high kills. So if the kochia can make it into the combine and make it to the mills, then we're going to kill most of it going through. There are some practical applications there, or not applications, practical limitations, because kochia stays greener longer. So you need to be mindful of how much is going through and how much you can actually push through your combine. But if we can get it into the combine, then it is promising to go through the mill. And then over here, this graph starts at 97% up to close to 100%. And then we can see here that this is across these different species. For the barley, the canola, and the pea chaff, that they had very good control across them, and that it was going to work on different crop types, essentially. And it's going to remain a very high level of kill. So this is the paper here. I was not involved in this one, but I can give you Brienne's contact information if there's interest. Just here shortly. So in summary, harvest weed seed control is a novel method for weed management. It's still being evaluated. It's very early on into adoption, but there is good promise with it. Some weeds are going to be better targets than others. With kochia having such a slow growth, it is quite promising that it'll have some application there, but I have seen with kochia, it can be the size of 3 inches tall, or it can be 6 feet tall. So there may be some practical applications of, can we get it when it's really small, and can we get it when it's really big? Seed retention is the biggest limitation. So if the seed's already on the ground, that's going to be hard to control it that way. More work is ongoing, but it does hold good promise. So this is Brienne Tideman here. She provides the slides and does a lot of the heavy lifting with harvest weed seed control. So you can contact her there. She's also very active on Twitter. And here's my email if you have any questions for me. And I'm going to conclude there. So I'm happy to field any questions if I have time.
No, we definitely have some time. So thank you very much, Shaun. That was a great presentation. And as a reminder, if you have any questions today, please enter them in the chat box in the bottom of your control panel. So the first question we have is, what rate of carfentrazone was used in this study? So the first study.
I know somebody's going to ask me that. It was the full label rate. I don't have the exact number right in front of me, but it was the full label rate for use as a pre-seed burn down.
So yeah, it would be the full label for pre-seed on the label as well as in the guide to crop protection. So
yeah, yes.
That's good. Okay. What was the reason camelina didn't have kochia, but when intercropped with peas, it acquired some population of kochia?
So there, I think that was largely had to do with the amount of peas. So with that canopy, I didn't get a super great measure on it other than yield, but the canopy had more peas in it. And I think, unfortunately, the peas were not as great of a competitor compared to the camelina. And so there was more light penetration through that canopy and a little more space. And they close canopy a little slower. So with the camelina, it's up and it's bolting and it's closing canopies. So it's absorbing about 90% of the incoming light, so that it's going to be very challenging for the kochia that's trying to emerge through it. And I think that's probably what happened when we weren't using the herbicide, is that the camelina emerged and grew quickly, it closed canopy quickly, so that there just wasn't a lot of space and light for the kochia to kind of survive by the time we counted it. Whereas when we had that mixed canopy, the peas were a little less competitive, and there was just some spots in that canopy where the kochia was able to survive. I think that's what's happening there. Yeah.
No, that's good. Thank you. How expensive is a coconut mulch? Is it practical for a large scale?
I don't have the price points on my head. I apologize. But at the rates that I was applying, it was just the standard erosion control rates. So I was thinking it'd be fairly practical at that point, but not getting 80% control, even in the first year or over 2 years. I would have to kind of dose it up to see. So I don't think it's going to be as practical as I was hoping it was going to be. Just because, if I have to put down 4 times the amount to get control of kochia, then that's 4 times the cost. So I it's not looking super practical compared to when I started. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be super practical there with the coconut mulch.
No, that's good to know though. Someone has to look at it, so that's great, right?
Yeah.
Um, so was there any allelopathic effect of camelina that inhibited the kochia to grow with the camelina?
That's a very good question, and that's an area I'm interested in. And actually, on the Govan study, sorry to take the question and divert, we were measuring the soils to see if kochia was essentially emitting allelochemicals. And we were measuring them in kochia, so it's very interesting. There is potential, yes, we did measure that, and I don't quite know which compounds the camelina might be emitting to that effect, but I think it's definitely a possibility. We do know it does happen in canola and other oil seeds, but we just don't have a lot of data on that, and it's a little bit challenging to study, especially for plant-to-plant interactions, since it's very, very intimate, like it's contact between the roots a lot of the time. So I think potentially yes, but I can't prove it yet.
Something definitely to look into though. That's cool.
For sure.
What are the economics and ROI, so return on investment, to some of the research projects being targeted to control kochia? This is a bit of a longer one. Farmers are going to need practices that are practical to manage but provide an ROI. For example, the pea camelina research is helping, but how easy is it to manage these crops and show profit or market for camelina?
Yeah, so there is a market for camelina. It's used as an oil for animal and human health. There is some intercropping being done already in the province at a smaller scale, largely with lentil, I believe. So there is a market for it. To be honest, I was initially looking at it because I was hoping it would smother out the kochia. But I think there is practical value there. As far as acreage, that would have to, so that one's going to be a little longer return on investment, since we would need to see adoption of a new intercrop. But with things like the on-farm study with the kochia patches, with the chaff, that in particular, I think is going to have a very short ROI, just because, especially with applications of that field chaff, that's something that's already in the system. That's something that's widely available to producers. And that's, so where it's already available, it's in their systems. It's just a matter of managing it either through chaff carts or however they may be able to manage it. But given the wide availability and already in the system, I think that can be uptaken very quickly, so that and can be implemented very quickly. And it doesn't even need to be field chaff. You know, you can use slough material, you can use mulches or like straw bales. So there's a lot of options there that might not necessarily be the exact treatment that I was using, but you can kind of get at that idea of using chaff to bury the kochia in different ways. But so I think that one will have a very short ROI, whereas the intercropping one is a little bit of a longer term approach, and we may need to look at other intercrops. I wasn't expecting the camelina to be quite as dominant, and I thought I might get more of a mixed stance, that the peas would be a little more profitable. So, you know, we may have some fine tuning to do that system, and we need to put less camelina in to get the peas growing. There's some more work to be done there. I hope that answers the question, Shannon.
Yes, it does. No, that sounds good. Thank you. With the amount of Invigor canola being grown, what is the risk of group 10 herbicide resistance to kochia?
Okay. Glufosinate is the group 10. It's a contact herbicide, relies on coverage. So much like carfentrazone ethyl with the AIM, this is another herbicide that's going to hit, or it's going to have activity where it's making contact, and it's not going to translocate. Since we already have resistance to the group 2 ALS inhibitors, the group 4 oxymimics, and the group 9 with glyphosate, those are translocating herbicides applied post-emergence. We've already got evolution and spread. I would say sooner rather than later. I don't want to put a number there because I don't want to manifest it, but I would say monitor carefully. I think it's coming soon, especially with the chink to the group 14. Especially if those herbicides start to break down, it's going to be more pressure on group 10 in the canola. So especially where we already know we've been spraying stuff post-emergence on kochia, that it's translocating. Those are very effective modes of action, like the auxins and with the group 9. You know, with the group 10, it is a good herbicide, it is effective, but since it's not translocating, any little slip-ups in application have no forgiveness, right? Those plants are just going to grow because they don't have that translocating element. It's not moving around in the plant. So I would say the resistance risk just intrinsically, based on the past history, is just higher there. So I would anticipate that it is coming.
Okay, no, good to know. How much chaff was applied for kochia control?
So for this one, we only had one treatment. So I kind of wanted to make sure it worked. So we kind of just raked and dumped until I got about 6 centimeters deep. I don't have a volume on that. I am planning and I've applied to do some more work to look at kind of how much weight that kind of translates to, and kind of having a dose response structure to look at, you know, weights correlation with depths and how that affects the kochia and crop emergence for that matter. So I don't quite know how much weight we put on, but we did put it on to about 6 centimeters.
Cool, thank you. You mentioned AC Saltlander and it couldn't get established. Is
Yep.
this something you're going to be testing in the future to see if AC Saltlander will combat kochia?
So practically, yes. I don't have any immediate plans, but a good BMP is going to be to establish some sort of perennial, which may be this grass, in areas where either your crop is not establishing well or are marginal areas so that kochia can't kind of tumble in and grow there. So from a practical application, it's still a very important thing. It's just unfortunate that we couldn't establish it right in the patches. But I think if we had been able to drill it and maybe even irrigate it a little bit, it probably would have established, but we were broadcasting and didn't have available water. So we didn't have a lot of luck. But I think as far as the practicality and with perennial plants in general, yes, I do have more plans, maybe not with that specific weed, or not weed, sorry, that specific crop. We do have some plans with others, like I'm collaborating with one group that's interested in yellow sweet clover, which is also allelopathic, and there are some studies from North Dakota that show it does displace kochia on remediated mines slowly. So there may be some competitive advantage there that we can exploit by planting. So I do have an interest in this area, but maybe not necessarily with that one crop, I guess is all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Ken Wall, our next presenter too, has done some work with forages, so he may have some more information there too.
Awesome.
What is the throughput on the seed destruction systems?
The throughput on the seed destruction systems. I actually don't know that off my head. I will have to reach out to Brianne. I know it can handle most of the combine rates or speeds that they're traveling at, but I can't really speak to that too much. But I will get an answer and I'll get back to you.
Yep, no, that's great, thank you. And this is another one that might be for Brianne as well. I assume the cost for the harvest weed seed destructor was purchase cost. They're wondering if there's an estimated cost per acre to operate a weed seed destructor.
Yeah, Brianne did do a survey of early grower adoption that I participated in. I don't have those numbers right in front of me, but I can get them. So there is cost, there is equipment wear and tear. You do have rocks go through, weeds are hard, the chaff can be hard, so you can get some wear in the mill itself. There may be some spots in there that need to be replaced. So there is some cost there. There is additional probably fuel costs, I would imagine and there is it's not really upfront cost. Well, not upfront. It's not a direct cost, but there is a power requirement to operate the seed mill on the combine. You need to have a certain class. So those are just another cost consideration that might be going into that.
Okay. There's another one about chaff. Were there any negative effects when applying chaff, like weather as a consideration?
Mm, my biggest concern would be the ability to establish a crop through the chaff, and I'm kind of hoping to do some more research there. Some large seeded pulses, for example, might have enough energy to kind of push through versus some of the smaller seeded stuff. Logistically, no, it actually performed surprisingly well. It was very stable even over the 3 years. We were starting to get a little bit of kochia because it's a tumbleweed. It was moving around a lot through the plots, and it would kind of establish on top. But I think if you just took a harrow and just kind of ran it over an area, I think that would fix a lot of that. So not a lot of concerns. It seemed, it did seem to hold moisture a little bit, and would kind of inflate a little bit, which was good against the kochia. But if you were trying to grow a crop through there, maybe some elements of stem disease that might come into play that I'm hoping to have a look at down the road. So
Next one, is there any research on crop rotations, managing kochia with crop competition?
yes, my colleague Charles Getty has actually just completed a round for the clusters with those, and I've seen his presentation, but I don't have it right in front of me. But yes, they were looking at fall annuals and competitive seeding rates, I believe, and that they were able to get systems to drive down the kochia. But I would need to defer to his work on that. But yeah, there is definitely work going on for that.
Okay, I think we have 3 more right now, if that's okay with you, Shaun, if we keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah, yep.
Okay. Any herbicide dual mode of action practices to share with farmers that help manage kochia in cereal, canola, and legume crops?
Where I work for the Fed, I can't really give specific herbicide recommendations, but what I can do is just say mix as many modes of action as you can, either in the tank at the same time so that they're both having activity on the same plant. That's probably the most optimal condition. If you can do it sequentially or through layering, where you're maybe doing an in crop that's a little different from your pre-seed burn down, maybe you're using group 14 pre-seed burn down, and then you're using, for example, bromoxynil, which is still quite used in your cereal, for example. Something like that, where you kind of you're getting both of those modes of action in the same year, to still have activity on the same plants. But so yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so basically you're rotating herbicide groups too, so you have different things targeting the kochia within a growing
Yeah,
season if possible, and definitely over the years.
yeah, for sure.
Um, what are some slip ups to potentially to apply in group 10 that can encourage resistance quicker? An example is water volume and coverage critical because it's a contact product. Is this the potential why group 14 has shown resistance if the water volume is too low being a contact herbicide? And this is glyphosate is applied at lower water volumes and AIM is a contact needing higher water volumes.
Yeah. Potential slip ups. Spray coverage, I think, is going to be the main thing. So anything that might affect spray coverage. So even just like wind gusts, so that your spray droplets are not coming down. Maybe having a nozzle that is more susceptible to drift and things like that, so that the product is moving around a little bit and not getting where you need it to go. Again, in interaction with the environment, where you now have increased wind and you're with your nozzles, you're a little drift susceptible. So now that it's moving around. Um, a lot of the growers are on GPS now, so I don't have a lot of concerns about overlap. But a lot of this coach is marginal. My biggest concern is staging, and with how the scale that we're farming at, is the kochia at the proper stage across your field where you're trying to spray it, right? I think that's going to be probably where it is, because then if it's a little too big, it's not dying. Now you got a plant that's exposed, survives, it's probably going to reproduce, and that's where you're going to start to get your buildup. So scout early and maybe go around spots that are too big, or have something in the tank that can handle something a little bigger. I know that's challenging for spot management, patch management, things like that, but the staging is really the area where I'm concerned about.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Um, the next one is how long of a life do seed destructors have approximately? Is it more economical to replace them or to maintain them?
I don't have a lot of information on lifespans. That's another one I'll have to defer to Brianne to get an answer for. I think it's definitely more economical to maintain them from the brief info I've seen. the costs aren't nearly as high, but there is costs associated with wear and tear and things like that. So yeah, but I'll have to check with Brian on that one.
Okay, thank you. I have one question. That'll be our last question.
Okay.
I was talking to a friend of mine who farms. I think they have 4 or 5 combines, and they were talking about, well, maybe next generation, they could put in seed destructors or something for control. And I was wondering too, if that's too big of a cost to do all the combines you have, if you could maybe have 1 or 2 combines that are kind of your weed specialists. So you're going in those ones in the weedier patches or something like that, and then the other ones can be cleaner patches if that works. I guess I was wondering what you're thinking about that.
Yeah, sorry, you
Oh,
cut it
sorry.
briefly there, Shannon. I didn't quite catch the whole question.
I was talking to a friend of mine who they farm and have multiple combines. So I was wondering what your thoughts would be on having kind of, if it's too much of a cost to do all of your next time you buy combines or to equip all of them, what about having like 1 or 2 that have seed destruction, so you can target those in the weedy patches and then kind of have the other ones go, if it's practical, go through and harvest what's clean or cleaner.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an opportunity. Having that on a combine that's going into your dirty fields is really going to help. You may also want to clean that combine before you take it to your next field, of course, because transfer of seed through the combines. But a lot of that material is coming out the back. If it's going through that mill, it's going to really help those fields, whereas it may not be as necessary in fields if they're cleaner. Yeah, so I think it still has some practicality there. Yeah, and I don't think you necessarily need to equip your entire fleet with it. But you can definitely, if you have a need for it, you can definitely just put it on one and kind of use it where you have the need. And then if you're getting good value out of it and you want to keep going, you keep going. Yeah, but I think there's definitely value to just having even one just to kind of evaluate and control some of these really bad spots, because Kochia's not going away.
No, unfortunately not. So, okay, thank you very much, Shaun, for all the
Thank you.
great information and presenting from some other researchers as well. We really appreciate that. And we can get some more information from Shaun later on to share to attendees in a follow-up email if that works for you. That would be great.
Of course, yeah.
Awesome. Great. Thank you very much. We really appreciate the time you took to join us here today and answering all the questions.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Next up, we have Ken Wall. We've had a couple technical issues with a shared link with a few other people. So we do have a couple of Ken Walls on here as panelists. So in order to share his screen, we will need to have just one. So we'll ask Ken to share there. Okay, we've got Ken there, and unfortunately we'll have to dismiss the other links that are in there. So please don't log in using the same link, and instead reach out to Ashley Kaminsky via email or to myself, and I can send the attendee link out. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Ken. Ken graduated from the University of Saskatchewan with a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture degree with a major in plant ecology and range management. He began his career with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and Swift Current in 1983, and the next 33 years are spent researching all things related to salinity. Forages, due to their elevated tolerance to salinity, became a significant focus of research over the years, and another focus was conducting salinity tolerance tests of many forages and annual crops grown in the Canadian prairies in the salt-tolerant testing lab with Dr. Harold Stapoon. Currently, he's working with Federated Co-op Limited as a grow team advisor for South Saskatchewan and Southern Alberta region, as well as a forage specialist for the Prairie region. Throughout his career, he's operated a small ranch south of Swift Current, and the majority of his land holdings are native prairie. So we will start whenever you're ready, Ken. And thank you for joining us from Alberta this morning. I think you're muted.
There, how about that?
Nope, that's much better. Thank you.
Okay, does this show up? Can you see my?
Just getting your camera right now, I believe.
Okay, you're not seeing my presentation? Sharing. Oh. Okay. Audience view. So you're seeing my camera right now? How about now?
Yeah, we see your camera. I believe it might need to change to you as presenter, Ashley. So right now you're a panelist, so I think we need to do a bit of switching on our end.
Okay. I've got my, okay,
Okay,
you
that
haven't made
change just
it.
got
Okay,
made.
show my screen. Okay. All right, how about now?
Yep, there we go. That looks great.
All right.
Yep. Good to go.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Whoops. I hit a wrong button here again.
No, I can see your presentation and see you as well.
Okay. All right, here we go. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar hosted by the Ministry of Ag. I'm happy to be here. Talking about increasing productivity on fields affected by salinity. That's going to be the main focus, although I'm going to be talking just some kochia management in general. And I have, what, 45 minutes or so?
Yes, that's correct. About 45 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. I'll have to speed along here. Okay. All right. So really quickly, I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about what is root zone salinity. The root zone salinity is the existence of any excess salts in root zones that tend to disrupt normal crop plant functions. And many of these salts are the common salts that we typically see in saline areas in the prairies are sodium, calcium, and magnesium sulfates, as well as there are some sodium, calcium, and magnesium chlorides, and there's some carbonates as well, but these are the main ones that we typically deal with. So the extent of the problem, and people often say, well, you know, it's really not that much land that's affected by salinity, but if you think about it, of the 53.5 million hectares of agricultural land across Western Canada, it is estimated that 3 million hectares are classified as severely saline. And by severely saline, that means that you really have very few crop options or cropping options. And basically, you know, they're growing kochia and foxtail barley is what they're doing. Then you've also got about 7 million hectares of arable land and 3 million hectares of permanent pasture that are classified as slightly to moderately saline. And here again, you're going to have, you know, cropping issues and things that you're going to have to manage differently just to make these lands productive. And then you've got another 4 million hectares that are at risk to becoming saline. And since we're in a moisture deficit climate, where typically we have more evapotranspiration than we have moisture coming down, you're going to continually have salts move up to the surface. And as the water evaporates, the salts are going to be deposited there unless we do some different management techniques to slow down that process or stop it. Talking a little bit about invisible or hidden salinity as well, research indicates that many crops are more affected by low to moderate salinity than previously realized. And testing in the SIFCURRENT Research and Development Center salt lab indicates that yield losses up to 50% for hard red spring at conductivities as low as 4 decisiemens per meter. So the losses are you know, more than people realize. And again, surveys, soil surveys estimate that about 7 million hectares of arable land across the prairies are classified as slightly to moderately saline. So it's a significant amount. So what causes salinity? Subsurface water moves salts into discharge areas. Root zone salinization occurs when evaporation pulls more water upward than precipitation or snowmelt move water downward. Hence, salinity problems are water management problems. So this picture here, thankfully, we've basically moved away from 50-50 cropping, and we moved away from a lot of tillage. You know, this is where a lot of the salinity problems were exacerbated. We get years where we get, above average precipitation. You get nothing growing on those fallow areas, and basically you get water moving through the root zone. And as it gets to an impermeable layer, water goes downhill, and sooner or later it's going to show up, fairly close to the soil surface. And as evaporation pulls the water up, you're going to have the salts being deposited. And you can see that in that low area, kind of in the center of that picture, all those little saline patches there, as well as some dark areas to the left, on the left side of the field, all, water table moving up and water moving around below ground. So salinity, and this is just a background I'm presenting here. It results in reduced annual crop yield, poor crop emergence and tillering, especially with cereals, lower yields, even at relatively low EC levels, and I just mentioned that. Some of the mechanisms of soil salinity, it restricts plant water uptake, osmosis. For example, water and nutrients are pulled into the plant because the salt content concentration is higher in the roots than it is in the soil water. However, if we get elevated salt concentrations in the soil water, now we've got maybe even concentrations, so it's much more difficult for the plant to pull water into the roots. And as a result, even though there is lots of water there, we've got basically a drought situation is what happens when we've got water with high salt levels dissolved in the water. Toxicity of bicarbonates and other anions, which can happen, and when you see those telltale white salinity patches, you've got elevated salts there, no doubt. Elevated soil pH from the bicarbonates often, and these caustic effects and low micronutrient availability, as well as poor soil aeration. And often you get poor soil structure just by not having much organic matter, not having much growing and much happening in that soil. So this is a typical example of a saline area, of a saline site. You get an upland where crop is growing really well. You've got a permeable layer of unsaturated soil, which in the upland area, we typically call the recharge area. And so you get water moving through that's not being used by the crop and moves into a water table, into a saturated zone. Usually gets, sooner or later it reaches an impermeable layer, and then the water starts moving downhill. You come to a discharge area, which is a lower elevated area, and now the water is, say, less than, say, a meter or so, maybe 3 to 4 feet from the soil surface. Salts get pulled up through evaporation. The water evaporates and leaves the salts there, as I mentioned before, and that's how you get that's how many of these saline areas develop. They're not all this mechanism, but this is a very common mechanism of salinity. So this table, I think, is really important. And again, this is something that, talk to many producers, talk to many agronomists. If you're talking about salinity at 0 to 2 decisiemens per meter, and that's why soil sampling is very, very important, so you know what your conductivity levels are. They're typically classified as non-salient, and you really don't have any cropping restrictions. However, if you're starting to approach, say, at the 6 to 24 inch depth, 2 to 3 decisiemens per meter, you're probably already going to have some issues growing lentils and maybe peas as well. At the 2 to 4 decisiemens per meter level, now this is classified as slightly saline, you're already going to have issues growing pulses. So having those in your rotation, essentially what you're going to become is a kochia breeder, because that's one crop that really seems to, it's an opportunistic crop, and it seems to really take a foothold in these areas where you got poor crop competition. At 4 to 8 decisiemens per meter, now we're looking at moderately saline land. I hate to tell you this, but you're basically limited to barley, canola, and forages. Forages, due to their elevated salinity tolerance, they can handle the, many forages can handle this, but you're really restricted to growing different crops on these saline areas. And that's, if you don't take home anything from this morning except one thing, I would ask you to remember this. If you've got conductivities of 4 to 8 decimeters per meter, you're really restricted in terms of what you can grow. At 8 to 16, severely saline, now these areas are white most of the time. You're basically restricted to grasses, and these grasses I would include would be AC saltlander, slender wheatgrass, and smooth brome. And then if it's more salty than that, you really got one choice, and that's AC saltlander, probably tall wheatgrass, but for different reasons. We'll talk about that later. So as the salinity increases, your cropping options decrease exponentially, and so in the end, you're really not looking at a lot of different options. So now talking about kochia. I missed much of Shaun's presentations. I'm sure he already talked a little bit about this, but so maybe this is going to be a review. But kochia can emerge after 50 growing degree days. It also has elongated emergence periodicity. It can emerge up to and after you have applied your in-crop and post-emergent herbicide applications. So it can basically germinate and emerge any time of the year. Each plant can produce up to 30,000 seeds, potential for outcrossing, which means it can select for resistance quite quickly. And you know, I think you've all heard Charles Geddes' presentations on glyphosate resistance, on group 2 resistance, group 4 resistance, and now we're even getting some group 14 resistance in that they've been finding. So the good thing about kochia, the seed bank is very short-lived. 90% of the seeds are not viable after the first year. However, that still leaves 10% when you do the math, 10% of 30,000. That's still 3,000 seeds that have the potential per plant of being available and being viable for the next year. So it's definitely a very elastic plant. It really knows how to survive, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. So kochia biology. First of all, it tolerates hot, dry, and highly saline environments. It's got a C4 photosynthesis mechanism, very competitive growth advantage when hot. When the seed 3 plants shut down and basically wait for some cooler temperatures and some moisture, the kochia can shut down its stomata and still slowly, slowly keep chugging away. Even with high CO2 concentrations within the plant leaf, it can slowly keep growing and outcompete these other plants. It self-pollinates and outcrosses, high genetic diversity, and something that I learned from Charles is actually the female part of the flower in the kochia plant matures about a week before the male parts of the flower. So the first pollination that happens is all outcrossing, and then as the male parts, the stamens mature, then it starts to incross. So lots of genetic diversity, really adaptable, highly adaptable in terms of becoming resistant to different stresses, which are mostly herbicides. 90% are resistant to ALS inhibitors, like I talked before. One plant can produce 5,000 to 30,000 seeds. It's got that tumbleweed dispersal, spreads long distances into adjacent fields on windy days, and I've got a really good picture about that coming up here in just a bit. The seedlings have tiny hairs that protect them from moisture loss, waxy cuticles that can block the herbicides and just plain block the herbicide from entering the plant. Or you get a much lower amount of herbicide coming in, and I've got a complete talk on water quality and the amount of water to apply per acre, which can have a huge impact on how well the kochia is controlled. I mentioned the seed bank is short-lived. 90% of the seeds are not viable after the first year, but that still leaves lots of seeds that can potentially make a viable plant. Resistance, a huge issue, and here's a picture that shows it really, really well. This field is really clean except for one weed, which you can see, one plant, which you can see tumbled across the field, and you can see the plants were totally resistant to whatever he was applying. This field, the picture in the bottom right, I was driving to Regina, and I actually stopped here in the morning on this field, right on this corner, and there was no kochia on these fence lines at all. That day we had about 90 km/h winds. This was late summer, and on my way back to Swift Current after my meetings in Regina, I stopped at this same spot again, and the reason was I couldn't help but notice the huge amounts of kochia on these fence lines. So knowing that the winds were from the west that day, a lot of kochia got seeded that day, and you can just see by the fence lines, the two fence lines, the huge amounts of kochia that broke off and tumbled down the field. So tips for controlling kochia. And again, Shaun has possibly already talked about this, but consider your staging. Kochia plants should be less than 5 centimeters for best control. Coverage is crucial. Use lots of water. And environmental conditions need to be right for optimal efficiency. Apply when the weeds are actively growing. And this really came into light about, I think in 2022, we had lots of issues around the country where the octane wasn't working. And basically what was happening as folks were applying the octane in crop, we had a period of time where temperatures were reduced to 2 to 3 degrees during the night. And then farmers would get out early and start spraying. And basically what was happening is these kochia plants had shut down, and as they were applying the chemical, the plant wasn't doing anything, and basically got very, very poor coverage, and the kochia just grew right through it. And so make sure that when you're applying, say, a group 4 product like octane, which is fluroxapyr, that make sure the temperatures were not too low the night before, and you've got the kochia actively growing when you're applying the herbicide, because otherwise you're going to have less than optimal control. Some more tips here. Key to success is spraying when the kochia is small. Residual fall applied chemistries, spring pre-seed applications are very crucial. Remember that kochia can germinate early in the spring and can be large by in-crop timing. Choose herbicides that provide overlapping modes of action that control kochia. Make sure that you have at least 2 modes of action in each one of your tank mixes when you are applying the weed control. Spray coverage and water quality is very important, especially where high populations exist and variable staging is present. I talk about in my water quality presentation where if you're applying 10 gallons per acre, you are actually only applying about 0.8 mils of water per square foot. Well, that 0.8 mils of water has to have the herbicide mixed. It's got to have the good coverage, so you're getting coverage on every plant in that population. And if you've got a really high kochia presence, for example, 50, 100, or even up to 400 plants per square foot, coverage is going to be really, really difficult, even with 10 gallons per acre. And now if you reduce that to 5 gallons per acre, you've got less than half a milliliter of water being applied on that square foot. Again, mixed in the herbicide and everything else, and trying to get good coverage can be really, really difficult and challenging if we reduced our water amount too much. Plan to target kochia at every herbicide pass. We're talking fall applied, residual, spring pre-seed, in crop. Make sure that if kochia is your driver weed, that you are targeting that at every pass. Use different modes of action where possible, and herbicide layering obviously is what we're talking about there. If kochia is an issue in your fields, consider residual products such as Volterra, Fierce, Edge, Focus, Authority, Insight. Talk to your agronomist about kochia herbicide management strategies. If you find that you're using, say, a fluroxapyr, you've been using fluroxapyr for the last 4 to 5, maybe 6 years on your cereal acreages, maybe think about changing it up, or maybe think about adding another active. For example, maybe a moxonil on top of the fluroxapyr, or maybe even as well as maybe 2,4-D. Just make sure that you're not using the same mode of action year after year on the same fields. So talking a little bit about the relative tolerance, I'm going to switch now to cropping a little bit. So this is a relative ranking of annual crops to salinity. And it's a relative ranking. So I basically made kochia a 10, and this is from work that we did in the salinity lab at the Swift Current Research and Development Center over many, many years. And so if kochia is a 10, barley would probably be a 6 or 7, canola would probably be a 6, which canola is every bit as tolerant as barley, but because you're seeding it at such a shallow depth, say, ½ inch to 1 inch, there's lots more happening there, lots more salts present in that top, inch, which gives kochia a definite disadvantage, or sorry, canola a definite disadvantage to emerge in those conditions. However, if you seed canola and get a couple of days of really nice rain and get the canola germinating and emerging, it can be every bit as tolerant as barley is in terms of handling the salinity. Then we go down from there. Mustard, somewhat tolerant, and then the others, the wheats basically for flax for, not really very tolerant at all. Camelina, hopefully, we were hoping that it was going to be more tolerant to salinity. It's very drought tolerant, but we found that that just wasn't the case, and maybe, part of it would be because of the small seed. Peas, lentils, beans, very intolerant to salinity, and if you're growing that in some areas that have saline patches, basically you're going to become a kochia breeder in those situations. Again, I talked about this one. The saltier your land gets, the saltier these patches gets, the more your cropping options are diminished. And so it sometimes still amazes me how many producers continuously try to, seed a pulse or seed a crop that's not that tolerant through these saline areas, hoping that it's going to work. And very often, if you can get some good moisture in the spring and get these plants emerging, you can get plants established. However, as the salts move back to the top of the surface, you're going to have issues. One big thing, again, if you don't remember anything from this morning, I would hope that you remember this one factor. If you cannot grow barley on a saline area, you're going to have real issues growing alfalfa. And I caught part of Shaun's presentation where he was talking about possibly including sweet clover, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. If you've got high saline levels, you're probably not going to have much success doing that, because if you can't grow barley, you're not going to grow alfalfa, and sweet clover is very similar to alfalfa. Plus, being a biennial, you're going to have to basically do some reseeding every couple of years, so that could present some challenges, but we can talk about that later. Oh, looks like I froze up here. Oh, maybe not. Okay, the legumes. This is the alfalfa, sweet clover, sandfoin, sisal milk, vegetables, foot tree file. I've given them a salinity ranking here as well. It's really, it's not very relatable to the annual cropping one that I presented earlier. This is basically now a perennial ranking, which we did. And again, I would probably have kochia as a probably 9 or 10, and the alfalfa would be down here, but as a 4. Again, if you cannot grow barley, you're going to have issues growing alfalfa. You're going to have issues growing sweet clover. So if your salinity levels are in that moderate range, you're definitely going to want to include some grasses and maybe reduce the amount of legumes that you have in these blends, because they will not compete with say foxtail barley or the kochia at these elevated salinity levels. Some of these the clovers, again, they're not that bad in terms of salinity tolerance, but being short-lived, it's something that you're going to have to continuously reseed, and that's going to really create some challenges. And so I would basically stick with alfalfa if you're trying to get something established in a saline area. So these are the grasses. And again, so if an alfalfa is a 4, foxtail barley and kochia would probably be an 8 in my perennial rankings. And then after that, you see you have green wheatgrass and tall wheatgrass approaching the salinity tolerance of foxtail barley, but nothing is more salt tolerant. So now to be able to compete, and we did a lot of research in this area where we would actually seed these different forages into saline areas and rate how well they competed with foxtail barley and kochia. And the thing to really remember in this case is you not only want a grass that is salt tolerant, you want a grass that has a rhizomatous creeping root habit or that will spread, and hopefully if you don't get perfect coverage as the plant continues to grow, it's going to take over more of that land, more of that area, and be able to outcompete foxtail barley. And we really found green wheatgrass was very good at doing that. Smooth brome to some extent. It's not quite as salt tolerant, but it's pretty aggressive as well. So if you make sure that when you're seeding a grass in a saline area, it doesn't consist of mostly, if that blend doesn't consist of mostly bunch or fibrous root grasses, because they will not outcompete the foxtail barley, and that's we documented that quite clearly. Any of these grasses below the red line, you notice most of them are bunch grasses. However, Altai wild rye is actually very salt tolerant, but being a bunch grass, not that competitive with some of the kochias and with the foxtail barleys in these highly saline environments. Creeping foxtail, not as tolerant, very aggressive though. So if you've got lots of high water table, you maybe want to consider that. But these are the grasses. I would concentrate on the ones that are above that red line in terms of what you're going to put into a saline blend. Here's an example of a project where we seeded into a severely saline area. We seeded most of those grasses on that previous slide, and had some real issues with the foxtail barley. The foxtail barley just took over this site with a vengeance, and you can see that with the plots only being 6 feet by 40 feet long, these plants had a real tough time trying to outcompete this foxtail barley. Alfalfa really did not do well. It was basically too salty for alfalfa. We still included it, and you can see in the top left hand of this slide there is some alfalfa there. However, not very competitive with the foxtail barley. The grass that really did well was AC Saltlander, and this plot that we see here, when we first did the plant counts, there was like 3 foxtail barley plants for every AC Saltlander green wheatgrass plant that was on this plot. But within 3 years, the green wheatgrass had pretty well outcompeted the foxtail barley. You still see a few plants in there, but basically it kicked most of the foxtail barley out, and you see foxtail barley all around. The plot to the left, the darker green, is actually tall wheatgrass, quite tolerant to salinity. However, being a bunch grass, you can just see all the foxtail barley that's still within the sward, making the hay probably not a whole lot of value. So creeping root is very important, plus elevated salinity tolerance when you're trying to outcompete some of these areas. And these are documented. Dr. Harold Chapun and I did many of these experiments when we first came out with AC Saltlander, and had a lot of success. But again, the more salty your environment, the longer it's going to take. Slight to moderately saline, in 2 to 3 years, you can pretty expect a clear, the AC Saltlander to kick out the foxtail barley. However, as you move from moderate to severely saline, it's going to take longer, and sometimes even after 5 years, you still may have some foxtail barley in there, just because it's very competitive. Here's another saline area, very salty, basically pure white, and we seeded it to AC Saltlander, and got some really good success. And I'm not going to talk about that this morning because that's a whole nother talk, but seeding into saline areas, there's certain things that you need to do. You really need to pay attention to your seed bed, and make sure that there's certain things that you need to do. Just broadcasting into a saline area, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of success. But we can talk about that in another presentation. Why would you include alfalfa in these saline areas? For the simple reason that there's no plant that uses more water. It's got excellent quality forage. It can really de-water recharge areas where it's not so salty, but you know where your water is coming from, especially if it's localized. And alfalfa is very good at building soil quality, and you can just see by that root there what alfalfa can do. So that's why even in some of these moderately saline areas, I still will include a pound or so of alfalfa in the blend, just because of that factor. Here's a slide that I stole from, I didn't steal actually, I borrowed it from Les Henry. very, very vivid how this forages can dewater recharge areas and increase productivity of these areas. As I mentioned before, salinity is caused when excess water brings salts to the soil surface. Through deep roots that improve drainage and high relative water use, forages help lower the water table and sometimes reduce salinity. However, you need excess moisture to lower the salts in the profile and to reduce the salinity. And again, that's another whole talk we can do about that some other day. In this case, at the Rosewood subdivision in Saskatoon, they had one part of the field in alfalfa for 7 years. August 18th to 19th in 2007, they received a 4.2 inches of gentle rain. The impact on a water table under the alfalfa was zero. The water table never rose at all. On the adjacent fallow field, the water table rose 4 feet. So absolutely amazing what the alfalfa could do in this case in terms of controlling the water. And again, salinity is a water use issue or water management issue. And if you can manage the water, you've got a great start to controlling some of the salinity. So the talk was supposed to be about forages to control kochia. And typically, and you've got saline areas, you've got kochia. There's lots of blends out there. There's lots of custom blends. There's lots of stock blends that the different forage companies have. But I do find that in those blends, many of the blends contain grasses that really are not going to contribute, or they're going to get outcompeted by the foxtail, or they're just not going to handle the saline conditions. So again, slight to moderate salinity. Basically, these are the forages that I would consider as far as legumes: alfalfa, sweet clover. As far as grasses, smooth brome, hybrid brome, tall fescue, slender wheat, Dehurian wild rye, green wheatgrass. Possibly intermediate wheatgrass would fit in this area, but some of these grasses are fairly short-lived, and as you increase or elevate your salinity levels where you put these grasses, they become even shorter-lived. So then now you've got to start redoing these blends every few years, and depending on which grasses that you have as your main grasses. So an example of a blend in a slight to moderate area, I would probably put 4 pounds of, in this case, I've got a salt alfalfa. And there's different companies have each have their own. Most of them all stem back from the same selection, so they're probably very similar. 4 pounds of salt alfalfa, and then again, I'm assuming in this area that you can grow barley. I would maybe put 4 pounds of Carlton smooth brome and 2 pounds of slender wheatgrass. It's probably a pretty decent blend. Another option would be alfalfa and green wheatgrass, or alfalfa and Carlton or smooth brome and green wheatgrass. So there's different variations, but choose a grass that you know is going to have success. I like slender wheatgrass because it comes up really quickly. It can cover the ground, even though it doesn't last long. It can really outcompete some of these, or help outcompete some of the foxtail barley and kochia early on in the seeding. So that's just an example. But again, I usually caution folks, keep it simple and make sure that you have species in there that are going to grow. Make sure that you have at least 1 or 2 creeping rooted or rhizomatous grasses that are going to outcompete in case you have areas where you didn't get much established and things like that. So very, very important to remember that. So don't look as much at the grasses that I have in there as to those principles in terms of establishing forages. Now, if you've got slight to moderate salinity, when you're prone to flooding, which often happens in these low-lying areas, yeah, you can include alfalfa, but if you've got more than 3 weeks of flooding, you're probably not going to keep alfalfa in the blend. And again, now you're looking at smooth brome grass, green wheatgrass, creeping foxtail, reed canary, possibly timothy if it's not very salty, because these grasses can handle flooding. In this case, I've got, again, a salt-tolerant alfalfa. Doesn't matter which one, they're all about the same. 1 pound, just because an area that may not flood, if it can get alfalfa established, you're going to increase your water use. And in this case, I've got 5 pounds of green wheatgrass, 4 pounds of smooth brome grass. You could go all green wheatgrass. If it's not that salty, you could go all smooth brome grass because they can handle the flooding. So that those are things that you have to know, and you have to make sure that you as agronomists are talking to your producers about that as well. So forages in saline affected soil, now you're looking at moderate salinity. You've got fewer options. I'm still including tall fescue, although you got to really have things right in terms of getting it established and stuff. You can put in alfalfa sweet clover, but definitely not make that as the main part of the blend, because you're going to have issues. So an example of a blend in this case, 1 pound of Barricade 2 alfalfa or some other salt tolerant, 5 pounds of AC Saltlander, 3 pounds of smooth brome, 2 pounds of slender wheatgrass. That, you know, a really good blend. You could make it even simpler, just include the AC Saltlander and a bit of alfalfa, or maybe AC Saltlander, Carlton smooth brome, and a bit of alfalfa. The reason, again, that I like the slender wheatgrass, it's a short-lived perennial. It really is aggressive the first year, and it can often be like a cover crop, and you know, help you know, to eliminate or minimize some of the kochia and some of the foxtail barley. Moderately saline, prone to flooding. Again, this is a different scenario. This is something that you as producers need to make sure you communicate to your agronomists, and agronomists need to make sure that you know how much flooding is going to happen, because more than 3 weeks of flooding, there's no point in putting alfalfa in, because it's not gonna stay in the blend. In this case, I've got a blend of 10 pounds of AC Saltlander green wheatgrass, 5 pounds of AC Saltlander, 5 pounds of smooth brome grass. So again, these are examples of species that you can have the most chances or the best chance of success with. There is a new green wheatgrass that is coming out in the market. It's supposed to be a little bit of a higher seed yielder, possibly will reduce the cost of the seed. And the initial observations are that they have maintained the salinity tolerance with that new grass, and I hope they have, because it's a really good tool that can be available in the farmer's tool belt in terms of controlling and maximizing production on some of these marginal acres. Forages, okay, now we're looking at severe salinity. You basically got 4 options. If it's white most of the time, you've got green wheatgrass, you've got smooth brome, you've got slender wheatgrass, and tall wheatgrass. That's really your only options. You can throw in half a pound of alfalfa in case in some of the edges you might be able to get some established, but that's really your only options. And even to have these grasses established in those areas, you're gonna need a lot of help from Mother Nature. You're gonna have to really pay attention to the seed the seed bed, and again, we can talk about that in another presentation, but something that is very, very important. Pay attention to detail, and don't just go and broadcast some seed and hope it works, because you're probably going to not have success. Here's another example of AC Saltlander. We had this, had a producer, he had an area of land, or it was just a few acres, which for many, many years, nothing grew except for some foxtail barley and kochia. I kept trying to convince him to seed it to AC Saltlander, and eventually he did. Really got lucky. Seeded the AC Saltlander, had about 2 to 3 weeks of drizzly wet weather, and basically pushed some of the salts, or most of the salts, down below the soil surface. Pretty well every grass seed that we put in that area germinated and grew. And this is the 2nd year after seeding. He got almost 3 tons per acre on this field, and it was basically kochia and foxtail barley free, and cut it for hay and got a tremendous crop. And above all, he's really starting to use up some of that water, starting to minimize the spread of this saline patch, and again, increasing his productivity. Very quickly, I'm just about at the end of my presentation here. Again, this is a very severely saline area, showing we had alfalfa in the blend, and you can just see how far the alfalfa came. Once it gets to too salty, the alfalfa just is diminished, and now you're ending up with grasses. So make sure that you have the right grasses in these areas. In fact, we didn't even seed the area to the very far right, because it was so wet we couldn't even get a machine in there. So there is engineering and vegetative controls. I'm just going to show you some slides to show you that is a possibility. However, as agronomists and even producers, when you enlist help of an agronomist or a professional, make sure they know what they're doing, because you can make a wrong turn really quickly and spend a lot of money and get very little results. So you got to make sure that you know what you're doing. In this case, it was a very localized saline patch. Basically had some bear paw shale that was on the right side of the screen, came close to the soil surface and dammed up some water. And basically and this is the result. Couldn't get anything growing. You see the kochia there, you see the foxtail barley, and nothing else. And if you basically took a shovel of soil out of this field, you would hit water everywhere, because the water was that close to the soil surface. So in this case, we tile drained it, put in some tall wheatgrass barriers. That's those stripes that you see there. Trapped some extra snow. We managed to push the salts down, and the few years later, we did the whole area, and you can see the tall wheatgrass barriers pushing the salts down and draining it out to the bottom right area. Worked really well, and right now the farmers seeding right through it and having lots of success, increasing the productivity. So for tile drainage, this is what you need to remember. To be successful, you need slope, you need the discharge area for your water, and you need to get your permits. So make sure you talk to a professional and make sure that you know what you're dealing with in terms of localized salinity or aquifer type salinity, because the more directly related to an aquifer, the less success you're going to have. So you got to know what's causing your salinity. So that is an option, but make sure you talk to a professional who really knows what they're doing. Converting saline land to forages would be more successful if done while the affected land still supported barley crop production. And I've had many producers come into my office. Yeah, 20 years ago, this land was pretty good. We just had some salinity in the corner. And now, well over half of this quarter is all salinity. I can't get anything to grow. What do I do? Well, maybe we should have talked about this 20 years ago. And many producers who don't have cows go, will it pay? I don't have cows. What is my return on investment? I got an example of one producer that seeded a bunch of his marginal land to forages, ended up with just over 2 tons per acre on land that he could never get anything growing on with annual cropping. Made the hay, piled the hay up on a main intersection, got an auctioneer to come in, and they had a hay auction, got just over $200 a ton on 2 tons per acre. You can get $400 or $450 per acre on land that you've never had much of a return on investment. It definitely pays. It sure helps that hay prices are high. So again, that's something that producers can consider. So what is the cost of not implementing forages as a management strategy for kochia and salinity? You basically become a kochia and foxtail barley refuge if you can't get nothing else growing on it. You're speeding up herbicide resistance. Salinity acres will increase if you're not managing the water. And if yields are limiting or zero anyway, there's no return on investment. So what do you have to lose? And once established, using the right forages, using the right establishment techniques, you can get yields of up to 2 tons per acre. But again, the arguments are establishment costs are prohibitive and difficult. Make use of programs such as the Sustainable CAP program, which I think is going to be talked about here in the next few minutes. Off-CAF, Ducks Unlimited, lots of programs to really help with paying for some of these establishment costs. Contact your local agronomist, and you as local agronomist, I'm sure there's many on the call this morning. Make sure that get yourself educated, make sure that you know about salinity, make sure you know about these programs, make sure that you know which forages can be used for establishment. Managing soil salinity. Salinity, as I've said, is a water management problem. Manage the recharge, manage the discharge areas, and hopefully you can stabilize or cure the problem. There are no soil amendments that can be applied to saline areas to mitigate the problem, despite what salespeople tell growers. Again, we're talking about humic acid, talking about some of these things. Can they help? Possibly a little bit, but we're just not looking at high enough levels of application to really make a difference in terms of all these exchange sites that you gotta alter. So again, it's a chemistry problem. It's an excess water problem. So make sure that, you know, you do your due diligence and you ask questions when you get, you know, people telling you that you can, by adding this product, you can solve your salinity problems. Get to know your fields. And again, producers, they know this. Identify the dominant recharge areas, identify the hidden salinity areas. Precision farming, you know, different data applications can all help with this. Be proactive. Don't wait till the problem gets worse. Consider annual crops with more salt tolerance, barley or canola. Higher seeding rates may help maintain annual crop yields within slight to moderately saline areas. Consider perennial forages, alfalfa in the dominant recharge, salt tolerant grasses in the discharge area. Managing kochia, we got 1 or 2 more slides. Rotate, stack your herbicides, grow competitive crops, pay attention to spray water quality and volumes, target kochia with every spray operation, narrow row spacing if that's possible, increasing seeding rates, manage these saline areas by increasing water use in the recharge areas, growing barley or canola if you're growing annuals, growing salt tolerant forages in the discharge areas, cutting, mowing, or tilling instead of waiting for harvest. And that's it. Any questions? I feel like I really breezed through that and covered a lot of information in a short time. There's still many other things that we could be talking about.
Nope, we definitely have some time for questions. So thank you very much,
Okay.
Ken. If you do
All
have
right.
questions, please put them in the chat box. I've got a few that have come up so far. One of them is, what is the tolerance of wheat and oats to salinity? Just a bit of a reminder.
So again, we're talking annual crops. The wheat, the durums are not as tolerant as barley. Oats is would be somewhat in between barley and wheat. So a little bit more elevated, but if you've got any salinity that's more than moderate, you know, that in that moderate range, you're not going to have much success growing these crops. So.
Okay, thank you. With some of the specialized fertilizer claims about lower salt indexes, has the contribution of our traditional fertilizers to salinity levels been measured or calculated?
I think there has been some work. Off the top of my head, I'm not, you know, very aware. However, when you're dealing with areas that already have elevated salt tolerances, and now you're applying 250 to 300 pounds of fertilizer with a fairly high salt index, you are, you know, contributing to the problem. Again, even at 300 pounds of fertilizer per acre, if you figure the, you know, acre foot of soil is basically which means the top 6 inches of an acre typically weighs about 2 million pounds. Now adding 300 pounds, it's going to take a lot of years before you're going to, you know, really increase the salts, especially, you know, the plants are using, you know, a lot of those nutrients as well. So in terms of increasing the salinity, what I'd be more concerned about is possibly increasing the pH, which, you know, we've seen that with some of these high fertilizer levels. You've seen the pH increase, and now they've got to deal with that. So that's probably the bigger issue. However, it's definitely not something that you shouldn't be thinking about.
Do you have a recommendation on how often you should be testing for salinity? Is it something that'll change quickly or a bit over time?
So I would probably, you know, you'll see the change happening on the surface. So if you've got a field that you know is you've got some salinity there, probably over like a 3 or 4 year period, it's not going to change much. However, having said that, after 2016, where we received almost 3 feet of moisture in much of the prairies, lots of water went through the soil profile, lots of water, you know, reached those water tables and started moving around. And I don't know how many producers I had come into my office the years following 2016. So I don't know what happened, but now, you know, we had that wet year in 16. Now we're in a drought situation and my salinity is increasing like crazy. Well, you got that excess water in the soil profile, and now it's with the negative evaporation, you know, rates. We've got water moving up, leaving the salts at the surface in all these low-lying areas. So you'll be able to see that. So again, every 3, 4, 5 years, I would for sure, you know, want to get a measure what my salinity levels are. However, having said that, when we're taking 15 to 20 cores per quarter, we're usually taking, measuring the best areas. So we're probably not getting a true indicator of what the salinity levels are as well. And I really want to say that when you're doing your soil sampling, go 0 to 6, measure your 6 to 24 inch depths, because I think that can often be a telltale sign. I had one producer who was really frustrated growing lentils on some of his fields. It seemed like about the middle of June, the lentils would just struggle, and it just looked, he always thought it was related to herbicide application with the group 2 herbicides. However, we did a complete soil analysis of his farm, of these areas that he was always having trouble with. Turns out every one of the fields where he was having trouble growing lentils, the 0 to 6 conductivity level was pretty okay. But once we got to 6 to 24 inch depth, he had elevated soil salinity levels in every one of those fields. And so we stopped growing lentils in those fields, problem solved. So very important to know what your salinity level is at depth as well.
Would it be useful to kind of GPS certain spots too, so you're testing the same spot?
Absolutely, absolutely, yep, absolutely. And I think most agronomists, they do that now, so it's good to know.
Okay, great. Next one is, what are your top tips for getting forages established on severely saline land?
So in about 2 minutes here, what I would really suggest is pay attention to your seed bed. And I was always amazed that when I was working with the federal government, we almost never had failures in terms of establishing forages. And I kept thinking, why is that? It wasn't that we were that smart. But as I thought back to our different saline patches, the first thing we did is we would move in and we would disc it, and we would, till the top 4 to 6 inches. We would really till. And I think what we did when we did that, we mixed the salts, and then we would go back and we would harrow pack and get a really, really firm seed bed. We would always try to seed in front of a low pressure system, so that we would plant this forages into the ground, get, ½ inch, an inch, sometimes 2 inches of moisture. You push those salts down 3 to 4 inches. Now these forages can germinate, they can establish, and once a forage is established or germinated, it can handle pretty high levels of salinity. However, when you're seeding into a white area and just direct seeding or even broadcasting, now you're putting that seed into that white area. So I think it's basically like putting seed into a salt shaker and expecting it to germinate. It's not going to happen. And so really paying attention to that. I know folks don't like to till, but when you're dealing with these saline areas, it's not like a typical saline or prairie ground. You've got lots of water. You need to get rid of some of that water, and you need to make sure that you can get a firm seed bed and have this forage established. So in a nutshell, that's what I would say. But again, that's probably another whole topic of conversation. So, but that would be my 3-minute answer.
Okay, no, that's awesome. And would it be okay if people would give you a shout or contact you if they've got some more questions, just with some establishment?
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. There were claims a few years ago that gypsum would help with salinity. Is this true?
So again, without getting into real detail, basically the answer is no, unless you've got a high, SAR soils, solonetzic soils with high levels of sodium. Yes, the gypsum can possibly help with and basically what you want to do is increase your infiltration or your water infiltration. However, in some of these areas that already have elevated salinity levels, and now you're adding large amounts of gypsum, which is calcium sulfate, you may be increasing your water absorption a little bit, but you're also exacerbating the problem by adding more salt. So it's really a site-specific thing. Again, talk to your agronomist. And I know there's not many folks that are really, versed in salinity these days, but there's still a few of us kicking around. Make sure that you know what you're dealing with before you start doing something like that, adding gypsum or whatever. Because if you're already looking at conductivities of 8, 10, or 12, now you add, gypsum or calcium sulfate. You've basically got 1 or 2 grasses that you're going to be able to grow anyway. So whether it's worth it or worth the investment. Again, talk to an agronomist, make sure you get, you know what you're dealing with.
Okay, thank you. Next one is, would a forage such as AC's Outlander be able to outcompete Kochia and any other crops that would combat or be competitive against Kochia?
Well, absolutely. If you provided you get the establishment, and again, pay attention to seed bed, to pay attention to your seeding. Make sure you have good seed to soil contact. Putting the seed, say, an inch or so below ground, or even say half inch, just so that it's not subjected to the the salinity at the very surface. So again, my top go-to grasses would be AC Solander and a smooth brome, meadow brome, hybrid brome to some extent, but they're not as aggressive. And again, we did show that you can for sure outcompete Kochia, you can for sure outcompete foxtail barley with these grasses, provided you get the right establishment. And again, the less salinity you have, the more options you have in terms of which grasses will work. But basically, you need to remember that you need to have a rhizomatous type species for sure as your dominant species.
Okay, thank you. That was our last question. So
All
we
right.
did have a bit of discussion earlier about establishing AC Saltlander. Do you have any comments or any tips specific to AC Saltlander that would help getting that established and seeding?
So I think that for sure the biggest thing I would want to mention is, if you're just broadcasting, really increase your seeding rates. Make sure that you've got maybe a rotary harrows or heavy harrows that you're actually trying to get a little bit better seed to soil contact. Hopefully do it in front of a rain. Really make sure that you listen to your forecasts. I remember we did one project up at Oya in Alberta. We had so many projects, we didn't actually get to it till the end of June. And we moved in with our equipment, and several farmers stopped. What are you guys doing? There's no way you're going to get this established. Absolutely not. Crazy government guys. But we did know that there was a big system coming through, and we worked up the soil. We got a really good bed. We packed it, harrow packed it. We seeded it with a drill, right at about that 3/4 of an inch, and packed it in really well. No sooner did we get off of that field than we had about 2 weeks of drizzly wet weather. Well, every plant we put in came up, and it just looked absolutely, we looked like geniuses. But again, it was mostly Mother Nature that made that work. But that would be my big thing. Pay attention to seed bed, and it can work. It definitely can work, but it's not a silver bullet, and you got to pay attention to all these details and make sure that you're doing a good job.
No, that's great. So thank you very much, Ken. Thank you for taking some time out of your day. I know you're away from Swift Current, but we really appreciate you joining us today and providing your expertise and sharing your knowledge. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email or give me a call.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next up we have Alanna Johnson. Alanna is an Agri-Environmental Specialist in the Swift Current Regional Office. Alanna attended both Olds College and then the University of Saskatchewan, driving her passion for Saskatchewan agriculture. Her experience includes working with agri-environmental programs, managing invasive weeds, and rangeland management. In her current role, she works with producers to implement environmental best management practices, such as converting marginal land to perennial forage and cross-fencing to better manage native plants. So we'll start whenever you are ready, Alanna.
I just unmuted myself, so let's make sure everyone can hear me.
Oh, sounds good and looks good. Okay,
I will get started here. So I am just going to give a brief presentation about some of the programs that I work with under the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership. I'm really going to focus on the Resilient Agriculture Landscapes program because that's the one that I work with the most. So please note that this presentation was updated recently, but the most up-to-date information can always be found on our website, which I will share information about at the end of this presentation. So please check the website before applying for any programming. So to start with, this is a map of the Agri-Environmental Specialist across the office. So that I'm just one of the Agri-Environmental Specialists based out of our Swift Current office. So I'm in Swift Current number 2 there. And what we do is we help farmers and ranchers implement environmental best management practices, or BMPs, on their operations. So this includes technical resources, assisting client with program applications, and pathfinding with various BMPs under the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership. So what is the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership, or Sustainable CAP? So this programming is part of a $485 million investment into Saskatchewan agriculture over 5 years. So this programming is a federal provincial investment, and it's cost shared on a 60-40 basis. This Sustainable CAP programs, they were launched in April 2023, and they're replacing the former Canadian Agriculture Partnership suite of programs. So there are some general eligibility requirements for all of the programs available to farmers and ranchers, but each program or beneficial management practice will have its own eligibility as well. So for our programs, producer applicants, they need to be Saskatchewan primary producers, at least 18 years of age or older, who can demonstrate a minimum of $50,000 gross farm income, First Nation bands or Crown Land Pasture Grazing Associations, and then persons related to eligible applicants will be subject to the program's maximum funding cap for each eligible applicant. So if you do have livestock, then they must have a PID as well, and PIDs can be applied for through the Ag Knowledge Center, so just give them a call and someone can help you with the application. So this is, I know Shannon at the very beginning of the webinar, she touched briefly on all the programs that are available. So this is a slide showcasing all of the suite of programs that are available under SCAP. And right now, under the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership, the one I work with the most is the Resilient Agriculture Landscapes program. So projects for this program need to be started after April 1st, 2023, and then they should be claimed within 18 months of the project approval or by March 31st, 2028, whichever is earlier. So this program focuses on improving water quality, soil health, and biodiversity through implementation of various beneficial management practices related to land use, grazing management, and livestock stewardship. So what a BMP is a beneficial management practice that's defined as any agriculture management practice that ensures long-term health and sustainability of agricultural land, positively impacts the long-term economic and environmental viability of agricultural production, and minimizes negative impacts and the risk to the environment. So it's important to know that each of these BMPs that I'll touch on today has its own eligibility criteria and requirements. And one of the requirements for all these programs or all the BMPs, is that the Agri-Environmental Risk Assessment, which can be found online, must be reviewed prior to starting the project. So for these BMPs, this is a list of all the BMPs that fall under the program. I'm going to focus mostly on the seeding forage BMPs, as they're the ones that are closest related to the topic of marginal acre management and Kochia in particular. So for separate applications can be made for each eligible project and each eligible BMP. So for these two seeding forage streams, I'll start with the tame forages first. So under this program, the land must be in annual cropland for a minimum of 2 years. The seed purchased must be common number 1 or certified number 1. There can be no more than 20% of a biennial species, and a minimum of 1 grass species should be included in that blend to be an eligible blend. This one is a rebate program, but the agri-environmental team can help identify goals. For instance, weed control, permanent ground cover yield, whatever your goals are, we can help identify that. And then we can help screen the project area for salinity or moisture limitations, as well as look for any environmentally sensitive areas. So this is 50% funding to a maximum of either $30,000 or $60,000, depending on which route the producer decides to apply through. The second forage seeding BMP under this one is the native forage BMP. So the purpose of this beneficial management practice is to establish native perennial forage cover to provide wildlife habitat and sequester carbon. Native plants are well adapted to variable climatic conditions and require minimal inputs and are resilient to grazing. So under this BMP, 90% of eligible costs are funded to a maximum of $30,000, and the maximum eligible payment, some of the details are on this slide here, but all this information is also easily accessible on the website, and there's some 2-page documents there where you can find out more information. So some of the resources that we look at when we're screening these projects, so setting goals and taking an inventory of what you already have in the field or what you're dealing with are important when you're looking at the tools in your toolbox and determining the best management plan for these acres. So an agri-environmental specialist on our team can help with suggesting some species that might be well suited to your field. So some of the resources include the forage you pick tool, which I've included the link here, and the forage crop production guide. And then the soils information, you can find the map there, and that provides some valuable insight to what you might be seeing on the field. And then we also use aerial imagery to help determine if, say, the forages might be well suited to that area, or if we should avoid forages that are maybe more aggressive next to natural areas or native prairie, or for instance, water courses. So I'm briefly going to touch on the Farm and Ranch Water Infrastructure Program. This is not a program that I work with closely. So this program is one that our agriculture program specialists work with, but since water quality is really important for spraying and kochia management, and for most livestock and farmers in the province, this is something that I just really wanted to touch on quickly. So under this program, there are a rebate stream and there's also pre-approval streams. So this one, under the rebate stream, wells, dugouts, and pipelines are potentially eligible, and that's at 50% to a maximum of $75,000, which is the cap over the life of the program. So you can apply for multiple projects, but they can't exceed the maximum of $75,000 under the program. So projects must be fully constructed and operational before applications can be made for this program. Projects must have been started after October 1st, 2022, and they need to be submitted prior to March 31st, 2028. And you must meet all regulatory requirements for water development projects before applying for the program. So that's where our agriculture program specialists can really help with screening these projects. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one. This is another stream under the Farm and Ranch Water Infrastructure Program that I work with. This is the well decommissioning stream, and it's 90% of funding to a maximum of $10,000. This one is one that you can talk to someone such as myself, an agri-environmental specialist on, and we can help you screen that project, whether we are checking helping to complete forms and check accuracy, or we can just help with the general application process. One thing to really note is a small diameter well must be decommissioned by a registered well driller in Saskatchewan. And then I'm going to briefly touch on this, more just an awareness that this is a program that is out there that can help the Ag Demonstration of Practices and Technologies program, or ADOPT program, helps provide funding to producer groups and First Nations communities to demonstrate and evaluate new agricultural practices and technologies at a local level. So some of the projects that we have worked, our team has worked with, I haven't been involved in any of these, but some of my colleagues have. So some of these include low input polycropping systems, marginal acres for pollinator habitat, and establishment of saline tolerant perennial forages as an annual cropland. I see that my screen went black, but there we go. So this is, oh, sorry there. This is the last slide that I have. So this has the links to the website with saskatchewan.ca/cap, as well as the Ag Knowledge Center, saskatchewan.ca/s-cap, and as well as the Agriculture Knowledge Center phone number. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to some of the specialists in your regional offices, but you can also reach out to this phone number and they'll direct you to your closest specialist working with the program that you might be inquiring about. I also have the Sask Ag Now e-newsletter publication sign up there, so you can get more information by visiting us online or giving the Ag Knowledge Center a call. So that was a really quick rundown of all the programs, but if you have any questions, you can reach out to any of us directly, or if there's time for questions, I can take a few now.
Okay, we don't have any questions so far. But if anyone does have questions, please put them in the chat box. I will wait for a small amount of time to see if there are any questions. Okay, no questions. You must have covered it really well, Alanna. So thank you very much. All right, we'd like to thank everyone for taking time to join us for this event. Right now, we're going to stop recording just so the QR code for